breaking
20% of the
update from
world's
the front
oil
line
stopped moving on
in a
February
rapid
28th,
sequence.
and almost 3
Multiple
months
tiers
later,
of
it
Russian
still hasn't
defenses
fully
are
started
collapsing
again.
simultaneously
That's where we
along
are
a single
tonight.
sector.
The Strait
Their
of
outer
Hormuz,
shield is
that
shattered.
narrow channel of water
Forward
most
supply
Americans
routes are
couldn't find
taking
on a
heavy
map,
fire,
has been
and
throttled
enemy
since the
infantry are
US
being
and Israeli
dragged out of
strikes on
hiding.
Iran began.
Even heavy
And the
artillery
consequences
batteries
of
deep
that
in the
single
rear
choke point
are
are
no
now
longer
bleeding
safe
into your
from
gas
our reach.
tank, your mortgage
This is
rate,
no longer
your
a simple
grocery bill,
report about
and something
isolated
far
target
larger
destruction.
that almost nobody is
Our
saying
forces
out
are
loud.
systematically stripping
Because
back
this was
the
never
entire
only about
battlefield
Iran.
network.
The
The moment
disruption
their
you're
first
watching in the
defensive
Gulf
shield
is the
begins to
surface of
fail,
something much deeper.
the entire combat
A
zone
quiet
behind it
contest
lies
over who gets to
completely
control the
exposed.
plumbing of the
If
entire
Ukrainian
global
forces
financial
are
system.
truly maintaining this
And the
crushing
people who
pressure,
built that system are
then the
starting to look
targets under
nervous.
immediate threat go
It's
far
the night of
beyond
May
a few
28th,
isolated trenches
2026.
and armored vehicles.
The market's just
We
closed.
are talking about breaking
and the story
Russia's
underneath
ability
the
to hold
headlines
this
is the
entire
one I
front
want to walk
line.
you through.
This is Professor John.
What critical node
and if you want
did
the
we
version
strike
of this
first
that the
to
cable
trigger this
networks
collapse?
won't
give you straight?
Why did a
Take 1
target
second and
positioned
subscribe.
miles
It
behind the
genuinely
contact
helps.
line?
Now
Not
let
an
me show
assault
you what's
tank,
actually
not
happening.
heavy artillery.
Let's start
Become
with the
the
number that
catalyst
matters
for this
because
massive
everything
chain
else
reaction.
hangs off it.
And when that electronic
Just a few
shield
weeks
went
ago,
down,
on the night of
what
the worst
tactical
of it,
shifts occurred
Brent
on the
crude
ground?
touched
Let us analyze the
$118 a
combat
barrel.
data together. Our
West Texas
neutralization of a
Intermediate
Russian
settled near
Paladin electronic warfare
$107.
system on the southern front
Those weren't
was critical,
theoretical prices
not
on
just
a
as a
forecast
lost
slide.
high-value asset,
Those were the
but
real
for what it
numbers
anchored in
traders
their
were
regional
paying when
defense
fear of a
structure.
prolonged
This
siege of
Paladin
Iranian
unit served
ports
as a
gripped the
critical
market,
node in the
and
electronic
Brent had
umbrella,
quietly climbed
jamming
to
our
its
signal
highest
networks,
level since the summer
disrupting
of
our
2022.
reconnaissance drone strikes,
Think about what that
and
means
shielding
for a
their
second.
command hubs from
The last
precision
time
attacks.
oil was up there,
Neutralizing
it was Russia's
a
invasion
capability
of
like
Ukraine
this
doing
is
the
far
damage,
bigger than destroying
and
a
that
single vehicle.
energy shock helped
It rips open the
supercharge
invisible
worst
protective
inflation
dome that
Americans
keeps
had
their
felt
ground
in 40
forces
years.
alive. Make
Here
no
we are
mistake,
again.
this
Different
precision
war,
strike was the
same
opening phase
chokehold
of a
on the
much
same
larger
artery.
offensive
Here's the part
operation.
that should make you pause.
Modern
As
combat
I'm
is no
recording
longer
this,
won
oil
by
has actually
tanks
come
and
back
infantry
down.
alone.
WTI
It is decided by
settled
dominance
below
over the
$89 a barrel
electromagnetic
after Iranian
spectrum where
state media
tactical
floated that
communications
Tehran would
reside,
restore traffic through
where
Hormuz
drone
to
control and
pre-war
jamming
levels
determine
within a
which
month of
side
any deal.
detects the enemy first
Markets
and
cheered.
strikes.
The Dow set a
The
record.
Paladin
The
platform was
S&P
designed to
closed above
dominate that space.
7,500.
It shields
Everyone
nearby
exhaled.
infantry assets and gives
Then the
enemy
White House
commanders
called a
the
report,
breathing room
a
to
complete
intercept our
fabrication.
threats early. But
So
once
which is
that
it?
electronic shield is compromised,
That's the whole game right
the
now.
tactical
The
environment
price of
shifts
oil,
rapidly in our
and
favor.
by extension the price
On a
of nearly
tactical
everything
map,
in your
the
life
coordinates
is
look
swinging
unchanged,
5 and 6%
yet the
in a
battle
single
space
session,
itself becomes
based on whether a
unstable,
peace rumor
leaving
is real
entrenched
or
forces
planted.
highly vulnerable
One
to
headline
incoming
says deal,
firepower.
the next says
This
the
is
deal
crucial
doesn't
in
exist.
high tempo,
And in between those
drone-heavy
two
operations.
sentences, billions
Our
of
military
dollars
leadership
change hands.
targeted this specific
That's not a
asset
stable market.
because we
That's a
understand the
market holding
mechanics
its
of
breath.
layered defense.
Now,
We
why does a
bypassed
strait
easy,
most people have never heard of
photogenic
have
targets
this kind of power?
meant only for
Because
media
roughly
victories,
1 in 5
and
barrels
instead
of oil
struck the
and a
vital
huge
support
share of the
node
world's
that
liquefied
allowed Russian
natural
field
gas
units to
physically
operate with
passes through
confidence.
it.
This is
There
a
is
highly
no easy
calculated
detour.
doctrine. We are
When Iranian
systematically
forces
softening up
blockaded
their entire
transit and
defensive
the US
perimeter
began
before
besieging
launching our main
Iranian
assault
ports,
force.
shipping
On
traffic
the ground,
through that channel didn't slow
knocking
down.
out their
It
electronic
basically
warfare
stopped.
units clears the
UBS
path for
put a
our
hard
heavy
figure
drone
on it.
strikes and
Observed
sharpens our
global
target
oil
tracking,
inventories
while
dropped
giving
by a
our
combined
frontline operators total
246 million
battlefield
barrels
visibility.
across
The
March
real
and April.
value of this action
And the
is
bank
not the
estimated
smoldering
cumulative
chassis of the
production
Paladin,
losses
but
could
the
top
massive
1 billion
tactical
barrels
blind
by the end
spot
of
it
this
leaves
month.
behind.
A billion
A punctured
barrels
jammer network
just
triggers a
gone
cascade,
from the available supply.
stripping their air defenses
And the people
and
who
leaving
run
their
Saudi
troops with
Aramco,
zero reaction
the
time.
largest oil company
This
on
simplifies
Earth,
our follow-up
warned that
operations
full normalization
and forces
of
their
Middle East
units
supply
to navigate in
might not
complete
happen until
combat
2027.
Do not
Not
misunderstand.
next quarter.
A single
So
strike
even in
does
the
not
best
win
case,
the war.
even if a
But
deal
one
gets signed
surgical
tomorrow
hit
morning,
decisively
the
shifts
damage
the
is already
local balance
baked
of
in.
power.
You
and
don't
sets the
undisrupt
stage
a
for our
billion barrels
breakthrough.
with a press release.
This is not an isolated
Here's where
event.
it touches you directly.
It is the
National
execution of a
gasoline
highly
prices hit
coordinated
4-year
plan.
highs
The
heading into
destroyed
Memorial
Paladin
Day
system
weekend.
was just the trigger.
Pump prices in the
The
U.S.
real
have been running
objective was
roughly
opening the gate
$1.50 a
for our
gallon
next
above
wave
where
of
they
kinetic
sat before
strikes.
this war started.
Removing that
And it
system
doesn't stop at the
immediately
pump.
reshaped the
Food
tactical
delivery
environment
costs,
for our next
airfare,
phase.
With
Retail
Russian
shipping,
jamming suppressed,
utility bills,
our drone teams are
all of it
operating
crept
with
upward
zero
as businesses
businesses did the only thing
hitting
businesses
targets
ever
with
do
lethal
with higher
precision.
costs.
This shift
They
is
passed
critical.
them straight through to you.
Successful drone strikes
The energy
rely
shock
heavily
isn't
on
an
steady
abstraction on a
signals
trading
and secure
desk.
telemetry
It's the
over
reason
long
your last
ranges.
fill-up stung.
When enemy signal
But let me
jamming
pull
drops,
back because the
our
gas
reconnaissance
price is the
sweeps
symptom,
become flawless,
not the disease.
and our fire missions
Watch the
are
bond
executed
market
without
because the
hesitation.
bond market is where the
This
real
does not
anxiety
mean the
lives.
airspace is
A
completely
couple of weeks ago,
uncontested.
U.S. government
It means
debt
the primary
had its worst
defense
weekly
tier is
rout
broken,
in a year,
making our
the
next
10-year
tactical
Treasury
maneuver
yield jumped
highly
to around
viable.
4.6%.
Ultimately, the
and
strategic
the 30-year
value of
climbed
this
toward
action
levels it
is
hadn't
the
touched
operational
since
window it has
2023.
opened.
And this
Taking out
wasn't
a
just an
single
American
jammer has
story.
permanently altered
Yields
the
surged
battlefield for
everywhere,
all
from
upcoming
Japan
assaults.
to Britain to Germany.
We have seized
all
a critical
at once.
window of
Because
opportunity
investors
to strike
across the
before the
planet
enemy
looked
can
at a
redeploy
war-driven
assets
oil
and
spike
patch their broken
and
line.
came to the same
With the
cold
first barrier
conclusion.
neutralized,
Inflation
pressure
is coming
shifted
back,
directly to Russian
and central
air
banks
defense.
may be forced to
This
keep
step
rates
was critical.
higher. Maybe
No
even
deep strike
raise them
operations
to
could
fight
proceed
it.
safely while
Sit
hostile
with that.
surface-to-air missiles
For most of
dominated
the past
airspace.
year, the expectation was
Intel
that
from
the
the
Federal
combat
Reserve
footage
would be cutting
confirms
rates
the
by
tactical
now.
sequence.
Job growth
Ukrainian
was softening.
recon
The
assets
path
located
seemed
Russian
set.
S-300
And
batteries,
instead, futures
immediately
markets are now
directing
pricing
bomber
in
drones
something
to
like a
strike.
coin flip
This
chance
was no
the Fed
isolated
actually
incident.
hikes rates by
It was
December.
the systematic
The
execution
entire
of a
direction of
broader
monetary
offensive.
policy got
An
reversed
enemy
by a choke
stronghold
point
can
in the
hold
Persian
out
Gulf.
temporarily, but
Why
once
should
their
you care
electronic
about a bond
warfare
yield?
and air defenses
Because
degrade,
that 10-year
the
treasury is
tactical
the number
balance
that
shifts
sets your mortgage
drastically.
rate.
The danger
It's the
remains,
benchmark
but it
underneath
evolves.
car loans, business
It becomes
loans,
manageable.
the cost of the
In
government rolling over
high-intensity
its own
conflict,
enormous debt.
that
When that
single
yield
variable
jumps, the
decides
cost of
whether a
borrowing
force
money
remains
across the
pinned
entire
down
economy
or
jumps
punches
with it.
directly through the
And
enemy
here's the
line.
quiet trap
This
nobody
is
likes to
exactly
name.
why neutralizing
We have
those
slowing growth
S-300
on one
batteries
side.
was our top
We
priority.
have sticky,
The
energy-driven
subsequent
inflation
deployment
on
of
the other.
Ukrainian fighter jets
Put those two
proved the
together, and you
strategic
get a word
success
that
of this
haunted an
operation.
entire generation of
Commanders do
Americans
not
in the
risk advanced
1970s.
fighter jets simply because a
Stagflation.
target is high priority.
The economy
They are
stalling and
scrambled
prices
only when
rising at the
preliminary
same time.
strikes have suppressed
The
threats
one
to an
combination
acceptable
central
risk
banks have
level.
almost no good
That
tools
is why
to
the
fix,
raid on a Russian
because
drone
every
command
lever they
post is
pull
so
to
critical.
solve one problem
A
makes the
tactical
other one
command
worse.
post is far more
Cut
than a
rates
static
to help
target.
growth, and
It
you
is the
feed
nerve
inflation.
center coordinating intelligence,
Raise rates to kill
battlefield
inflation,
comms,
and you choke
active
off
drone
what little
strikes in
growth is
real
left.
time. Penetrating that
box the
far
Fed may be
proves the
walking
enemy
into.
protective layers
And
were
it's why a
already
New York Fed
compromised.
survey showed
The
consumers
operational
now
sequence
expecting
is
inflation
vital.
at 3.6%
First, we suppressed
a
their
year from
electronic
now.
warfare.
People can
Then
feel it
we
coming.
systematically dismantled
Now,
their air defense.
let me take a breath here
finally
because I want to
leaving
be honest with
high-value
you about
rear
something.
targets
It
exposed
would be easy
to
for me
manned
to sit
aircraft.
here and tell you
This
this is the
sequence
definitive
reflects
end of
cold
America.
calculation,
The collapse is here.
not luck.
Sell everything.
It demonstrates
That's the easy
seamless
video to make.
synchronization
It gets
between
clicks.
frontline drone
But
operators
it's not
and
quite
strike
true,
pilots
and you came
executing
here for
the
the
same
truth.
battle
So
plan.
let me give you the more
Analyzed
interesting
together,
and more accurate version.
these combat actions reveal a
The U.S.
brilliant
stock
tactical
market is
logic.
at record highs.
Ukrainian
Right
commanders
now,
were not
tonight.
striking at random.
The Dow closed
They
above
systematically
50,000 for
peeled
the
away
first time.
defensive layers
The
until a
S&P
clear
is sitting on
corridor
fresh
was carved
records.
out.
Chip
This
stocks
doctrine
have
is
tripled
crucial.
this year on the back
Modern
of the AI
warfare is
build-out.
about exploiting
So
temporary
on one screen
windows
you've
of
got a war
superiority,
strangling the global
not
oil
maintaining
supply,
absolute
bond
territorial
markets convulsing,
control.
gas
When our
at
forces
four-year
jam
highs.
communications,
And on the other
blind
screen,
enemy air defenses,
equities are throwing a
and
party.
immediately eliminate
How
a
do
command
both things
node,
exist at
we
once?
secure far more
That
than a
gap,
single tactical
that
victory.
contradiction.
We seize
That's the
absolute
thing I
momentum
actually want you
across
to
the battle
understand,
space.
because
That
it
is
tells
the
you something the
strategic
headlines
reality of
miss.
this operational phase.
The market isn't
The
pricing in
Palantir
collapse.
system was
The
not the
market
end
is pricing in
objective,
a
it was
bet.
merely the breach.
A bet that this oil
neutralizing
shock
the
ends soon,
S-300
that the deal
widened
gets
that gap.
signed, that AI
Slamming the
profits
drone
keep
command
flowing,
post proved
and that the
this
whole
tactical
thing
corridor
resolves
was
before
wide
the
open for
inflation
deep
genie fully
penetration
escapes the
operations.
bottle.
With that pathway
Wall Street is
established,
essentially wagering
the high-value
that the
targets
worst
were no
case
longer
doesn't
restricted
happen.
to air defenses
maybe they're
or
right.
deep rear assets.
But here's what
They were
makes me
vulnerable
uneasy.
on the ground.
Markets at
precisely
record
where our
highs,
next offensive phase
leaning
was primed to
entirely on
kick
the
off.
assumption that a
This was
fragile
never a random
on-again,
raid.
off-again
It was a
ceasefire
calculated,
holds.
multi-stage
That's not
operation
strength.
designed to shatter the
That's a
enemy
very
defensive
expensive
zone,
hope.
making it
One
impossible
bad
for
headline
Russia
out
to
of
hold.
Tehran,
Our next
one tanker
offensive
hit in the
phase
strait,
pivoted away
one
from
collapse in the
static-heavy
talks,
systems
and that
to hunt the
optimism
mobile
reprices
supply
in an
lines that
afternoon.
keep the Russian frontline
We've watched
combat
it happen
units
4 or
alive.
5 times already
In
this
war,
spring.
a defensive line
Oil drops on a
collapses
rumor,
instantly without
jumps when the
constant
rumor
delivery
dies.
of fuel, food,
The
and
records
heavy
you're seeing
ammunition,
aren't built on
and
solid
vital
ground.
materials to
They're
fortify
built on a guess
positions
about a
under
war.
fire. We
Okay,
deployed the
now
Signum
we go
Battalion
deeper,
and elite
because
drone
so far
teams
I've
to
only
launch
described the
devastating
fire.
first-person
I
view
want to show you
strikes
what's
on
burning
enemy supply
underneath it.
trucks feeding the combat
For 50
zone.
years, there's been
These
an
targets
arrangement
were not
holding up
random
American
targets of
financial
opportunity
power that
caught
most
on
people have
empty
never
roads.
thought about for even
They
a minute.
represent the vital
It's
lifeline
sometimes
that
called
keeps
the
hostile
petrodollar
trenches
system,
fortified,
and the idea is
manned,
almost
and
embarrassingly
capable of
simple.
resisting our
The
continuous
world's oil
pressure.
gets priced and sold
Striking
in
a
US
supply
dollars.
truck before it arrives
Saudi Arabia
is far
sells you
more
a
than a
barrel,
transport
you pay in
loss.
dollars. dollars.
It
Every
actively
country
ruptures
on
a
Earth that
fragile
needs
logistics
energy,
network
which is every
that depends
country,
entirely
therefore
on
needs to
precise
hold
timing
dollars to
and
buy
vulnerable
it.
transit routes.
And the surplus
The
dollars the
real
oil producers
tactical
earn,
impact of
a
choking
lot of them got
logistics
recycled
is
straight
felt
back into
long
U.S.
after the
assets,
kinetic strike,
especially U.S.
not
government
just in the
debt.
explosion.
Follow
A
that
single
loop,
failed
because it's the most
delivery
important
cascades
loop in
across
modern
the entire
finance.
front.
Global
One
demand for
destroyed
oil
truck
creates
could have
global
been carrying
demand for
timber
dollars.
to reinforce
Global
critical
demand for
bunkers,
dollars creates
or
global
fuel
demand
for
US
battlefield
treasuries.
generators,
And that
food
constant
rations,
structural
and
appetite
key
for American
supplies
debt
desperately
is
needed
a big
to
part of
survive
what lets
another
the United
grueling
States
day of
borrow at a
combat.
scale no
When
other
these
nation
supplies
could dream
fail to
of,
arrive,
run enormous
tactical
deficits,
decay spreads
fund its
silently.
military,
Forward
and still keep
positions
the
cannot
dollar
be
as the world's
reinforced.
reserve currency.
Trenches crumble
The
without
whole thing
maintenance.
feeds itself.
Enemy
Oil
commanders
holds
are
up the
forced
dollar,
to delay
the dollar
operations,
holds up the debt,
ration
the debt
critical
holds up the power.
resources, and
So
send
now
more
ask the
high-value
question that this
vehicles to their
entire
deaths.
conflict is really
Our
about.
forces are not simply
What
hunting
happens if you start
isolated
pulling
targets.
oil out of that loop?
We are
and pricing
systematically
it in something
dismantling
else?
the very timetable
That's the move.
holding the Russian
That's
front
the
line
real game
together.
being played behind
Once
the
that
missiles.
logistical schedule
Iran,
slips,
with
the
backing
integrity
from China
of their
and Russia,
defensive line
has
rapidly
every incentive to
deteriorates from
accelerate
within.
what people call
This explains why
de-dollarization,
relentless drone pressure
chipping
on
away at
supply
the dollar's
networks
monopoly on
inflicts
energy
damage far
trade
greater than
by
the
pushing
combat
oil and
footage
gas to
suggests.
settle in yuan,
Logistics
in rubles,
is the vital bridge
in euros,
translating raw
in anything
resources
but dollars.
into lethal combat
For a
power
country
at
like
the point
Iran,
of contact.
locked out of the
Once you
dollar-based system
disrupt
by
that
sanctions
tactical
anyway,
supply line near the
this is
zero
an
line,
ideology.
even
It's
fortified
survival.
positions
And for China,
crumble.
the world's
A
largest
platoon
oil
might still
importer,
hold bodies
reducing
and
its
reserve
exposure
ammo,
to a
but
currency
their capacity
Washington
to
can
sustain
weaponize
defensive
is simple
operations
strategic
collapses
logic.
rapidly.
And it's
a
not
single
just
drone
talk.
strike on one supply
China launched
vehicle
yuan-denominated
triggers massive
oil
cascading
futures back in
failures across the
2018.
entire sector.
PetroChina has
Munitions
settled
arrive too
cross-border
late.
oil purchases in
Armor
digital
runs dry
yuan.
to conserve fuel.
China and Russia
Defensive
now conduct
trenches
the
are
bulk
left
of their
half dug and
bilateral
exposed.
trade in their own currencies,
These small tactical
bypassing
disruptions
the
do
dollar
not make
entirely.
headlines, but they dictate
India has
how
bought
long
Russian
Russian
oil in
survives under
rupees.
pressure. They
When the
force
West
Russian
froze
elements to
roughly
operate under
$300
extreme
billion
tactical
of
strain
Russia's
long
central
before
bank
our main
reserves
assault
after the
teams
Ukraine
close in.
invasion,
We must
it sent a
understand
message
that this
that every
operational
government
pressure
outside the Western
achieves
orbit
victory
heard
through
loud and
brutal,
clear.
relentless
Dollars
repetition.
in the system
It does not
can be
take
turned
one
off.
single spectacular hit
And
to
nothing
reshape
makes a
this
country
battlefield.
want an alternative
It requires
faster
constant,
than watching
calculated
someone else's
intercepts
savings
to make
get
every
switched off
advance a
with the flip
gamble
of a
and
switch.
every logistics run a suicide
So that's the bigger
mission.
picture the transcript
That
was
constant
circling.
threat
The
forces
argument goes
frantic
that these
changes in
conflicts,
convoy routing,
Iran, Russia,
delivery windows,
Venezuela,
security
even the
escorts,
shifts you've seen
and
in West
vehicle
African
intervals.
states like Mali,
Every adjustment
Niger,
bleeds
Burkina
time.
Faso,
Every
pulling
new
away from
precaution
Western
proves
influence
that the enemy rear
aren't just
echelon
isolated
has
regional
completely
dramas.
lost its footing.
They're nodes
That is
in
the
a single
strategic
contest
design
over
behind
whether
these
the
targeted drone
dollar-based order
strikes on
keeps its
frontline
grip,
logistics.
or whether a
They aim
multipolar
to
system
shatter
with the
operational
yuan
continuity,
and others carving
not
out
just to
space
generate
takes
burning
hold.
metal on roads.
And the claim is
When
that
the
as more
supply
of these
chain
resource-rich
snaps,
regions
frontline
drift out of
troops
Western
digging
reach,
into the next
the
defensive
West gets
belt
more aggressive
are
about
abandoned
holding
to
on.
face severe ammunition
Because what's at
shortages
stake
and
isn't a
mounting
patch of
panic.
desert.
That is
It's
when
the
our pressure
financial
drops
architecture
directly
that's
onto their
underwritten
infantry,
American prosperity
targeting
for half a
soldiers trying to
century.
scatter and find cover.
Now, and
as
this
they
is where
try
I
to
have
slip
to slow
through
you down
gaps,
because
they
this
enter a
is
lethal
exactly
kill
where
zone.
these conversations
Russian
go off
forces
the
here
rails.
did not launch massive
The dollar is not
unified human
collapsing
wave
tomorrow.
assaults.
I need you to
They
hear that
split
clearly,
into small fire
because
teams,
the internet is
filtered through
absolutely
gaps,
flooded right
and
now
seized empty
with people
buildings,
telling you
trenches,
the petrodollar is dead,
tree-lined scrub,
the Great Reset
and
is
dark
here.
basements.
Get into gold and
This
crypto
tactical
before
dispersion
Friday.
was a cold,
And the honest
calculated
data does not
battlefield
support
gamble.
that drama.
Knowing
Let me
massive
give you the
armored
real
columns
figures.
get obliterated
The
instantly
yuan's share
under
of global
watch.
payments
They
through the
scattered
SWIFT system
manpower across
sits
a
at
wider
roughly
grid,
2.5% to 3%.
hoping some could still apply pressure on
3%.
Ukrainian defensive lines.
And a big chunk of even that
with
small
heavy
slice is
casualties.
just China-Russia
A few
trade
survivors
that
might
exists
penetrate
because of
the line,
sanctions,
forcing
not
a
because
defensive
anyone
reaction.
actually prefers the yuan.
On paper, this is
The
a
dollar
dangerous
remains
threat.
the most liquid,
In practice,
most trusted,
it revealed
most
a
widely
fatal
held
flaw.
currency on the planet,
Under continuous
and there is
aerial
no
surveillance,
near-term replacement
spreading
that
out
can
no
match
longer
its
keeps
depth.
you alive.
The
It
serious
merely breaks
analysts,
one massive
the ones at
target
places
down
like
into
the Asia
multiple
Society
smaller
who've studied
signatures,
this carefully,
allowing drone
land in a
crews to
much
hunt
more
them
measured
one by
place.
one. What
Their
ground
conclusion
commanders
is that a
call
complete
tactical
de-dollarization of the oil
looks like
trade
absolute
is highly
predictability
unlikely
from a
over the
pilot's
next 5
monitor.
years.
What they
This
expect
reality is
instead
what makes
is
the current
gradual
phase of
erosion,
combat so
a
highly
slow
instructive.
leak, not a sudden
Our
burst.
recon drones do not require
The dollar
massed
share of
enemy
energy
formations
settlement
to log
softening at the
targets.
margins over
They
years
only
and
need a
years,
faint trace of
not
movement,
vanishing in a headline.
a shadow freezing by a doorway.
So why am I spending
a
all this
helmet
time
slipping
on it
into
if
a
it's not
trench,
imminent?
or leaves
Because
shaking
here's
in
the
a
thing
tree
the
line.
doom sellers get
Once
wrong,
target
and the
acquisition
dollar
is confirmed,
cheerleaders also
the
get
kill
wrong.
chain accelerates.
They both treat it
Observers
as binary.
lock the exact
Either
coordinates.
the dollar reigns supreme
Constant
forever,
tracking determines
or it
if the squad
collapses
is
next
dug
week.
in, stalling,
And the
or
actual
gearing up to
story is
advance.
neither.
Within
The
minutes,
actual story
FPV
is direction.
kamikaze drones are guided
Every
straight onto their
sanction that
heads.
freezes a country's
In this
reserves,
transparent environment,
every barrel that settles
cover
in
still
yuan,
has utility,
every central
but its
bank that
protective
quietly
value
adds
has
gold
plummeted.
instead of treasuries.
A thick tree line might
Each
hide
one
you
is
from
a
direct
small
ground
nudge
fire,
in a single direction.
but it offers zero
None
shield
of them
against
ends
the
the dollar.
high-resolution overhead
All of
lens.
them, together,
Reinforced
over time,
basements
change
mitigate
the slope
artillery
of the curve.
fragmentation. transportation.
And what this
but they
war
become
does,
death traps
what the
once
Hormuz
drone
crisis
pilots map
really
out every
does in the
exit
long
and
game
entry point.
is hand
Trenches
every country
protect
sitting
against
on the
direct
fence
fire,
a fresh
but
reason
they offer no
to reduce
shelter
its dependence
once
on a
coordinates
system
are logged by
that can be
loitering
disrupted by
munitions.
American foreign
Every
policy.
single delay
That's the
increases
part
the
that should give you
probability that a
pause.
temporary shelter
Not that
is
the dollar
transformed
dies this
into
year,
a pre-registered
but that
strike
the events of
coordinate.
this spring may
The
be
broader
quietly
takeaway
accelerating
here
a trend
is that enemy
10 or
infantry are
15
not
years
just
out
getting hit while
leaves the
sprinting
United States
across open
borrowing in a
fields.
world that needs
They are
its
being
currency
hunted
just a
down
little
despite
less than it
adapting
used
their
to.
tactics.
Picture
Legacy
what that means
survival
in practice.
techniques now invite lethal
If
risk
global
under
appetite for
relentless
U.S.
aerial
debt
surveillance.
erodes even
The
modestly,
exact maneuver
while the
used to
U.S. is
avoid a
running
mass
enormous
casualty
deficits
event
and rolling
now
over a
feeds
debt
the
pile
enemy a
measured in the
steady
tens of
sequence of
trillions,
trackable targets.
then who buys all
the
those
cover
treasuries?
of darkness has also
and at what
been
interest
stripped
rate?
away. Night
You may have to
operations may
offer
delay
higher
visually
yields to
guided
attract
systems,
buyers.
but thermals
Higher
and
yields
continuing
means
high
higher
altitude
interest
sweeps
costs
mean
on the
hiding
national
spots
debt.
are lit up like
Higher
day.
interest costs
This
eat the federal
revolutionizes
budget,
the nature
and the
of
budget
infantry
pressure
maneuvers.
compounds year after
Scrambling
year.
into a bunker
That's
is
not
no
a
longer a
collapse.
safe haven.
It's something slower.
In
and
reality,
arguably
it simply
more
marks the
dangerous,
start of
because
a
it's
brutal
harder to see
countdown
and harder
from
to stop.
identification to impact.
It's the cost of
This
money
operation
quietly
demonstrates
rising for
that
the most
Ukraine is
indebted
looking
government
far
in human
beyond
history.
merely targeting troops in
Let me
open
bring this
fields.
all the way back to your
They are
kitchen
dismantling
table,
the
because I
enemy's
don't want this to feel
operational
like a
confidence
finance
at every
lecture
step,
floating somewhere
from
above
transit
your actual
to
life.
concealment to the next
Here
advance.
is the chain, start
and
to
once
finish.
tactical pressure
A
pursues
choke point in the
infantry
Persian
anywhere,
Gulf gets squeezed.
even behind cover,
Oil spikes toward
that same
$118.
absolute vulnerability
Gas
begins
hits
creeping
four-year
backward
highs
to
and
target the
stays
heavy
$1.50
artillery
above
assets
where it
supporting
was.
them. This is
Inflation
exactly why this
expectations
phase
climb.
matters far beyond
Bond
the
yields
localized
jump
infantry
worldwide.
clash.
The 10-year
Instead of
pushing
throwing off our
4.6%.
defenses, these
Your
repeated
mortgage gets
attempts
more
to hide
expensive.
just map
Your car
out
loan gets
predictable
more
enemy
expensive.
patterns,
The Fed gets
exposing
trapped
routes
between
and
growth
pauses
and
we
prices.
use to plan
Meanwhile,
surgical
the same
strikes.
crisis pushes more
In the Lyman
oil-producing
sector,
nations towards
Russian
settling
artillery
trade
is taking
outside
heavy
the dollar,
fire,
which over
exposing
the
a
long
massive
run could
tactical
chip at the
shift
very
across the
foundation
entire
that
front
lets
line.
America borrow cheaply
Intel shows
and run
targeted
the
enemy
financial
artillery
world.
pieces were not
Every
sitting
link
out
in
in
that
the
chain
open.
is real.
They were dug
Every
into
link is
hangars or
happening
fortified
right now.
positions,
And almost none of it
desperately
requires
trying
you to
evade
believe
our
in any
aerial
conspiracy at
reconnaissance.
all.
This
It's
is
just the
critical
mechanics
because
of a system
artillery
under
remains
stress,
the primary weapon
fully
the Kremlin
visible if you know
relies
where to
on
look.
to hold their
And
lines,
that's really my whole point
disrupt
tonight.
our troop movements,
You don't need a secret
and
to
support their
understand
frontline
this.
infantry.
You don't need someone
Once we
whispering about
locate
what
and
they
neutralize these
aren't telling you.
assets, the strategic
numbers are
impact
public.
goes far
The
beyond
Treasury
losing a
yields are
single
public.
gun.
The oil
It strips
prices
their
are public.
indirect fire capability
SWIFT publishes
in that
the
sector,
payment shares.
crippling
The
the
feeling that
primary
something
defense
larger is
system
going
they
on
use to
isn't
stabilize
paranoia.
the line
It's
under
just
our
what
pressure.
it looks like when you
That
connect
is why
dots
our
that are
drone
usually
units
presented
hunt
to
their
you
big
one at a
guns
time
relentlessly.
on separate channels.
One
by people
surviving
who'd rather
piece
you
can
panic
dictate the
or
battle
rather
for
you relax
hours,
than actually
but a
understand.
silenced gun immediately
So
shifts
let me leave the
tactical
speculation
dominance in our
behind
favor.
and tell you what
Let's
I'll genuinely
analyze
be
this
watching
Lyman
from
footage
here,
it proves.
because the next
the gap
few weeks
between
decide
detection
which
and
version
strike
of the
has
story
collapsed.
we're living in.
In one strike,
First,
an
as the
FPV
deal actually
drone breached a
materializes,
hangar,
or do we keep getting these phantom agreements that one side
this
announces
proves
and the
fixed
other
overhead
denies
cover
within
no
hours?
longer guarantees survival
Because the market
once
has
your
now
coordinates
priced in
are
a piece
compromised.
it has not been given.
Walls and camouflage
If that
only
hope
buy
cracks,
time.
oil
They will not
reprices
stop a strike
upward
backed
fast,
by persistent
and those
surveillance,
record-high stock
perfect
indexes
timing,
have a long way to
and the
fall.
ability to fly a precision
Second,
drone directly
watch the
onto the
Fed.
target.
If energy-driven
exposes the
inflation
fatal
forces them
flaw
to
of
hold
static
or hike
concealment.
when everyone
In
expected
the early
cuts,
phases of this conflict,
that single decision
a
ripples
bunkered
through
gun
every
could
loan in the
survive and
country.
operate
Third,
for weeks.
the slow one, the
Today,
one that won't trend
that
on any
fortified
given day,
position
but matters
is a
more
death
than all the
trap.
rest.
The issue is
Watch
no
where the
longer
world's
just
oil
hiding the
revenue
asset.
gets recycled.
The real question
Watch
is whether
whether
it can
central banks
survive
keep
after
buying
detection.
treasuries or keep buying
And that is a
gold.
far more brutal
Watch
challenge.
the direction, not
Let's
the
look
day.
deeper.
Because
These strikes
empires
reveal
rarely
the
fall the way the
terrifying,
movies
rapidly
show it.
expanding reach
There's
of
usually
modern
no
drone
single dramatic
warfare.
moment.
Frontline
flag
infantry
coming
are no
down at
longer
noon.
the only targets at
It's
constant
slower than
risk.
that.
Rear
It's a
line
thousand small
artillery is now
decisions
locked
by
in
a
that
thousand
same
quiet
relentless hunt,
actors,
lock,
each
and
one
destroy
reasonable
cycle.
on its own.
This
each
means
one
the
nudging
tactical
same
rear is
direction,
no longer secure,
until one day you look
even
up
without a
and the
major
ground has
breakthrough
shifted
on
under
the
your
ground.
feet, and you
It
can't
forces
quite
artillery
point to the
crews
moment
to
it happened.
calculate far more than just
The United
range,
States is not
payload,
finished.
and rate
Let
of
me
fire.
say that plainly.
They
because
must
I've
now
spent this
weigh
whole video
operational
resisting
habits,
the easy
thermal
doom.
signatures,
American
and how
markets
fast
are at
a
record
fixed
highs.
firing position
American
becomes a
technology
marked
is leading
target.
the world.
Once
and the
strikes
dollar
hammer
is
these
still
rear
the deepest,
artillery
most
pieces,
trusted currency
the depth
on
of the
Earth by an
entire
enormous
battlefield
margin.
shifts.
None of that is
Supply
fragile
lines,
in the way the panic
frontline
merchants
troops,
claim.
and heavy guns
But
are
strength
no
and
longer
trajectory are
isolated
two
in
different
separate
things.
tiers of danger.
A runner can be in
They are
first
now
place
merged
and
into
slowing
one
down at
single
the same
lethal
time.
zone of vulnerability.
And the question
Ukrainian
this war
forces are
forces,
scaling up
the
long-range
question
strike
underneath the
operations,
oil price and the
permanently
bond yield
altering
and
the
the
depth of this
petrodollar,
battle space.
isn't whether
These
America
advanced
is strong
platforms
today.
do not just
It
fly
obviously
further.
is.
They
The
fuse
question is
real-time
whether the system that
reconnaissance
made
with
it
terminal
strong is
attack.
quietly being
This allows
rewired by
recon
everyone
assets
else.
to acquire the
One
target,
barrel and
while
one
an
bond
attack
at a
drone
time,
moves in for the kill,
while we argue about a
requiring
strait
minimal
most people
pilot
still can't
input at the
find on a
terminal
map.
stage. But make
So
no
here's the
mistake,
only thing
raw
I'll leave you
range
with.
is not the critical factor
If the
here.
foundation of a power
The real
is the
shift
thing
is the
nobody
ability
thinks
to
about,
project force deep
what does it
into
tell
the
you
rear
that
while
suddenly
maintaining a
everybody's
lightning-fast,
thinking about
highly
this
flexible kill chain.
This is
Rear
Professor
staging
John.
areas
I'll
that
see you
once
in the
felt
next one.
secure are
20%
now
of the
targeted
world's
with
oil
zero
stopped
warning.
moving on February 28th.
Lethality is
and
no
almost
longer
3 months
confined
later,
to the
it still
forward
hasn't
edge of
fully
combat.
started again.
The threat vector
That's
is
where we are
radiating
tonight.
outward,
The
turning
Strait of
safe zones
Hormuz,
into active
that narrow
combat
channel of
environments.
water most Americans
This
couldn't find on the
psychological
map
shift is
has been
devastating
throttled
behind
since
Russian
the U.S.
lines,
and Israeli
leaving
strikes on
command
Iran
posts,
began.
staging
And the
areas,
consequences of
and
that
supply
single
routes
choke point are now
permanently
bleeding into your
compromised.
gas tank,
Make no
your
mistake,
mortgage rate,
this
your
rapid
grocery bill,
expansion of
and something
long-range
far
drone
larger
strikes
that
is not
almost
just some
nobody is
minor
saying out
technological
loud.
upgrade.
because this
It
was
fundamentally
never only about
redefines
Iran.
operational distance.
The disruption you're watching in the Gulf
Simultaneously,
is the
Russian
surface of
forces are
something much
deploying
deeper.
low-cost,
A quiet
mass-produced
contest
Molia
over who
drones,
gets to control the
which
plumbing
fly
of the
dozens of
entire global
kilometers
financial
and
system.
pack enough explosive
And the people
payload
who
to
built
remain
that
highly
system are
lethal.
starting to look nervous.
This gives them high threat
It's the night of
capability
May
on a budget,
28th, 2026.
saturating the airspace
The market's
and creating
just
a
closed.
logistical nightmare.
And the story underneath
the
the
primary
headlines
threat
is the
is
one
no
I want to
longer
walk
just
you through.
destruction.
This is Professor John.
It is sheer
And if you
aerial
want the version of this
saturation.
that the cable
While
networks
single
won't give you
units lack
straight,
sophistication,
take 1 second and
their
subscribe. It
overwhelming
genuinely
volume,
helps.
frequency, and
Now let me show
unpredictable
you what's
flight
actually
paths
happening.
create extreme
Let's
pressure
start with
on
the number
ground.
that matters.
That is
because
why our
everything else
forces
hangs
must
off it.
respond with more than just
a few weeks
electronic
ago,
warfare
on the night of the
jamming
worst
and traditional air
Brent
defense.
crude touched $118
We are now fielding
a
low-cost
barrel.
interceptor drones
West
to
Texas
neutralize these
Intermediate
threats,
settled near
marking a critical new
$107.
phase in this war.
Those weren't
Drone
theoretical
operations are
prices
no
on a
longer
forecast
just simple
slide.
seek
Those
and
were the
destroy
real
missions
numbers
against
traders
armor
were
or
paying when
trenches.
fear of a prolonged
This is now
siege
a
of
battle
Iranian
of
ports
layered,
gripped the
integrated
market.
aerial systems.
And Brent had quietly
Recon
climbed to its
platforms
highest
locate,
level since the
strike
summer of
assets
2022.
execute. Electronic
Think about
warfare
what that
units
means for a
jam
second.
and disrupt.
The last
And
time oil
interceptors
was up
now
there,
work to
it
sever
was
the
Russia's
kill chain
invasion of
before
Ukraine
impact.
doing the damage.
This triggers a
And that
two-way
single
electronic
energy
struggle
shock helped
where
supercharge
adapting on the
the
fly
worst
matters
inflation
just as much
Americans
as
have
raw
felt in
firepower.
40 years.
What looks like a
Here we are
single
again.
isolated strike
Different
is
war,
actually tied
same
to a massive
chokehold on the
network of
same
sensors,
artery.
Here's the part
target
that should make you
acquisition,
pause.
and
As I'm
interception
recording this,
systems
oil
that are
has actually
scaling
come
up
back
by the
down.
hour.
WTI
Our reports show a
settled
theater
below
where a
$89
single
a barrel
blast tells
after
only half the
Iranian
story
state media floated
and
that
points
Tehran
directly
would
to a
restore
wider
traffic through
operational
Hormuz
doctrine
to pre-war
we are
levels
actively
within
mapping
a month
out.
of any deal.
What we are witnessing
Markets
is no
cheered.
longer random
The Dow
artillery
set a
fire.
record.
It
The
is a
S&P
highly
closed above
synchronized,
7,500.
devastating campaign.
Everyone
Ukrainian
exhaled.
commanders did not count on
Then
one
the White
silver
House called the
bullet to
report
shift the tide.
a complete
They
fabrication.
stripped away cover,
So
shattered
which is it?
defender morale,
That's
choked
the
off
whole game
supply
right
routes,
now.
and
The
punched
price
deep
of oil,
into the enemy
and by
rear.
extension the price
This
of nearly
progression is
everything
critical.
in your life,
It
is
proves
swinging
modern
5 and
war is
6%
won by
in a single
overlapping
session,
grids of
based
reconnaissance,
on whether a
jamming,
peace
and
rumor
precision
is real
fire.
or planted.
The traditional line
One
between
headline
the
says
zero
deal,
line and
the
safe
next
rear
says the
areas
deal
has
doesn't
completely
exist.
collapsed.
And in between
Now,
those two
pressure
sentences,
shifts instantly
billions of
from
dollars
electronic
change
warfare
hands.
to air defense.
That's not a stable
and from
market.
supply
That's a
logistics
market
to
holding
frontline
its
infantry,
breath.
and
Now,
from concealed
why does a
artillery
strait most
to the
people have never
relentless
heard of
drone
have
war
this
raging
kind of
above.
power?
Because
This is
roughly
the real
1 in
lesson
5 barrels
of this
oil
engagement.
and a huge
It
share
shows
of the
that
world's
victory depends
liquefied
less on
natural
holding a
gas
single trench
physically passes
and
through
more
it.
on keeping the
There
entire
is no
network
easy
alive
detour.
under fire. The
When
moment that
Iranian
defensive
forces
network
blockaded
fractures,
transit, and
every
the US
single
began
asset in the
besieging
rear becomes an
Iranian
easy
ports,
target.
shipping traffic
Subscribe
through
to
that
Military
channel didn't
Force
slow
right
down.
now for
It basically
verified
stopped.
tactical briefs on
UBS
weapons
put a
systems
hard figure
and
on it.
high-intensity modern
Observed
warfare.
global oil
We do not report
inventories
on
dropped
combat
by
to
a
glorify
combined
violence,
246
but to
million
analyze its
barrels
brutal realities
across
and
March
remind
and
us why
April.
peace is vital.
And the bank
Stay with
estimated
military
cumulative
force,
production losses
because the more
could
clearly
top
we
$1 billion
analyze
barrels
conflict,
by the end of this month.
the more we understand
$1
the
billion
true
barrels.
price of peace.
Just